50. That's the number of years that my next two guests have spent in the legislature. I'm Malia Zimmerman, and this has been News Behind the News, and we're going to get a great wrap-up from Representative Barbara Marumoto and Senator Sam Slom on their perspectives of what happened this last legislative session, especially what's happened with the taxpayers.
Especially.
Yeah. So welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us today. And Representative Marumoto, I want to say that you've been in the legislature for 34 years, right?
Yes.
And in about 6 more months, you'll retire.
I will hang it up, but I will be at my desk until the last day and taking calls from constituents and attending neighborhood board meetings.
Well, congratulations on all your many years of success in the legislature.
Well, thank you. I wish it could have been more successful, but you know, if they had only listened to me a little bit more, then maybe more of my bills would have passed.
Well, okay. Actually, they did listen to her, and they took her bills, and they put their names on them and passed them. So actually, Representative Marumoto has passed a lot more bills than you would get by just looking at the name, but that's the process.
Well, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
That's right.
One time I introduced a bill that would require the governor to appoint somebody if there was a vacancy in the House within 60 days. And I introduced it for 3 legislatures. And then the 4th legislature, it was copied word by word by a Democrat. And it passed.
Then passed. Yeah.
That's just the way it is, right? When you're in the minority.
Absolutely.
Because
right.
You're one of 8 in the House, and
out
8 Republicans. You're one.
I'm one of one. Yeah.
One of one in the Senate.
Right.
The lone ranger.
Majority of one.
Right.
Majority of one. But you never, like you said, you can't argue with yourself or.
Well, and I always bring 100% whenever I come to a committee or if I'm voting. We're always in agreement. That's correct.
And you are on 15 committees.
All Senate committees. That's right.
And Representative Marumoto, how many committees are you on?
I have 7 committees. However, my afternoon committees all meet at the same time. So I've got Finance, Consumer Protection, and Judiciary Committee all meeting in the afternoons. And so they're calling me there, and I get a message on my phone. Got to vote in Finance, so I can run over there. I vote, and I come back to Finance, and jumping around.
A little chaotic when you're in the minority.
This is why you hire young people for session hires. Young people with strong legs and strong hearts. You let them do the running for you and call you. But Representative Marumoto brings up a good point. I mean, here I am sitting on all the committees, outnumbered 24-1, and a committee clerk will come from the next door and say, "Oh, Senator Slom, we need you for a quorum." Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, "What the heck? Quorum? 24-1. 24-1. But that's the nature of the beast.
That's what happens when you're on all 15 committees.
That's right.
And they know you're at the legislature and they can find you.
Right.
Okay. Well, tell me about the legislative session. What were the highlights? Were there any good things that happened for taxpayers, for business, or what were some of the downsides?
I can't think of too much for business, but there was one aspect of it which was kind of interesting. The governor had several bills, several projects that he wanted to effect. But he wanted to do it by getting rid of all environmental protection laws, all permitting, all procurement laws, historic preservation, and I couldn't believe the scope of it. I mean, I could see where you could certainly tweak certain processes, regulatory processes, to hurry things up for an important project or two. But he put 10 bills in one bill, which were not my favorite projects, like the rail project.
They were all state and county government projects.
Yes, but I guess they were. And they were the 650-foot tower in Kaka'ako.
Pohokaina Street.
That's right. Some of them were, were meritorious in that broadband culinary center on the slopes of Diamond Head, Mauna Kea Observatory. Well, was it the telescope? Mm-hmm. And I can't think of any others, but a lot of big, important projects. And I think that, you just can't say these are important to us, it's a policy consideration, and we're going to get rid of all these other laws. It's just like, get out of my way. And so it got to the point where we had role reversal, where we had the Republicans saying, hey, wait a minute, right. You cannot ride roughshod over all these laws. And just for these questionable, some of them were questionable projects. So we raised a loud voice, especially Representative Gil Riviere and Representative Cynthia Thielen, And people started paying attention. What was happening? And the environmentalists woke up, and the entire community. And when you put up a 650-foot tower, do you realize that the height limit in Honolulu is only 400 feet? So this is the state just saying, hey, county, out of my way. Mm-hmm. There would be a rail station at the bottom, and so it would be a TOD project, transit-oriented development. Yeah. So it's fast-tracked, literally. And so that was, to me, kind of the high point of the whole legislature. The whole tenor of it was the governor's projects, and the House was really pushing them big time.
Well, the good news is, and you asked about the taxpayers, actually there was nothing really done, directly for the taxpayers. We didn't lower the cost of living, didn't reduce taxes, didn't put back those exemptions that were taken away last year. But two things I think are significant. One is it's an election year. And because it's an election year, a lot of tax proposals, like the ones that were introduced last year, were not reintroduced this year, but mark my words, they'll be back next year after the election. But the second thing is that small businesses particularly were facing a tremendous burden again for another tremendous increase in the unemployment compensation tax. Yes. And both the House and Senate, majority and minority, all got together, fast-tracked that bill, passed it earlier in the session to at least hold the rates to where they were last year, because they were going to go up another several %. And what that would do is destroy jobs, number one. It would hurt businesses and make more businesses close down. So from that standpoint, yeah, it was a good thing. But there were a lot of fees that came online, either new fees or expanded fees. And from that standpoint, I mean, it was really difficult. The environmental issue, though, that Barbara brought up is really interesting. Role reversal, yeah, probably, except that what we had always said as Republicans was, okay, the permitting process had been really difficult for private enterprise. We've discussed that for decades. Nothing's been done. All of a sudden, you want to fast-track certain projects, but only government projects. And we always said, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. One of the other controversial measures was the funding and building of this so-called undersea cable to link Lanai, Molokai, Maui, perhaps the Big Island, with Oahu.
Oh, that's right.
To generate electricity to Oahu. Well, again, a lot of these environmental activists from the neighbor islands, who usually never paid too much attention to Republicans, they camped on our doorstep, and they have very good arguments about why we shouldn't have windmills all over the island of Lanai, why we shouldn't have this undersea cable. And I had opposed that cable last year, and I carried the water for it this year because, first of all, it's a $2 to $3 billion project. It's an untested technology. It's true we have undersea cables, but not to the depth of what we have right now. And those are communications cables which differ from power generation cables. And the neighbor islands, it really set up a schism this year, more so than ever before, between neighbor islanders and Oahu. And that's still going to go on. And in fact, you're going to have some neighbor island activists running against some mainline Democrats in this fall's election, which will be very interesting. And then we had the normal ban this, ban that, plastic bags being the notable thing. And it's always interesting to me, if you identify something as being bad, which, by the way, it was not when you actually look at the statistics, the bags. Then what the government says is, okay, it's bad, it's terrible, these plastic bags are going to jump up from every corner and choke us to death, but we'll let you have it if you pay a fee. And so what it always comes down to is it's a money grab. Mm-hmm. Well, in the end, that bill didn't pass, but the city council in Honolulu joined the other neighbor counties, passed a plastic ban bill, but it doesn't go into effect for 3 years. So we'll see about that. But along the way, there were a lot of very other interesting bills, those that affected consumers. And basically, I know Dick Rowland of the Grassroots Institute always asks the question, look at a bill and ask, does it increase or decrease your freedom, liberty, and choice? And if we use that as the thing to go by, we really don't see anything that increased a person's choices, transparency in government, access to information, or anything like that.
So go ahead, Barbara.
No, I was concerned about transparency because I voted against a bill that would allow the departments to take the Office of information practices to court
OIP,
to appeal
right.
their decisions. And so I really thought that the law was designed to make the Office of Information Practices rulings the last resort, and not take it to court so if the departments didn't want to disclose some information.
And it's really interesting about that bill. We had a lot of people come in and testify against that bill. Individuals, organizations, respected person like Bev Keever at the University of Hawaii, and they all testified against it. If we remember back several months, it was Governor Abercrombie that fired the director of OIP, who had the audacity to say that under state law, the governor has to release and make transparent the names of the judicial nominees. The governor did not like that ruling. He fired her, replaced her, and the new director of OIP said, oh, the new law would be great, you know, it's okay and all that. But it would have been a terrible thing, and there's a lot of little laws like that that the public doesn't see. I mean, we introduce nearly 3,000 each session. 250 to 300 pass the legislature. Most of those are signed into law, but it's a very small performance, and a lot of them don't even get hearings. So those are the things that, you know, Representative Marumoto and I are on the lookout for particularly.
So you had the big issues, the big environmental issues on whether they were going to be able to, the governor and some of the Democrat majority that wanted to fast track the bills so that they skipped all the environmental normal processes,
Input,
the permitting,
hearings, yes.
hearings and public input. That was the huge issue. You had the plastic bag ban. That was they brought the Girl Scouts down to the Capitol to try to push for this. And of course, Senator Mike Gabbard was very big on that. That was his big passionate issue.
That bill was dead.
Uh-huh.
And this is what we always tell everybody. Nothing is dead until we get out of there the last day, turn off the lights, and leave the building. The bill was technically dead. He brought it back in the last 2 weeks of the legislative session. Same thing with the undersea cable bill. So I think people are getting smarter, the voters and all, even though it's more difficult in some ways to follow what's going on. With the technology, with a good website that the state does have, the legislative website, people are more akamai, they can follow bills, and they do. But you've got to be down there. You've got to be down in the legislature to do it. And thank goodness the citizens are doing that.
Now, what about this state bank that we kept hearing about? Did that ever pass?
Thank heavens, no.
Basically, we wanted to have the Bank of Abercrombie, right?
It would have been, yes, the governor would have been the
Abercrombie
CEO.
would have been the CEO of the state bank.
Chairman of the board.
Yep.
And there were different proposals for that. One was a green, so-called green
There
bank.
were 4 different proposals, that's right. The bottom line is what that state bank would do, and by the way, it'll be back next year, no question. What that would do is make loans on projects and to individuals and organizations that no fiscal responsible bank or institution would make loans. And if that sounds like the mortgage debacle with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, it would be exactly the same thing.
And also they wanted to buy toxic mortgages.
Yes.
And when one permutation, they would pay families to stay in their homes. And I was saying, well, why should we do this with state money? You know, there is a federal program that will qualify some families and lower the principal. So maybe they could make their mortgages and stay in the house. But this way, why would the state want to buy the mortgages in the house and keep the people in there? And at what point do you let them stay forever, their children? It was.
And by the way, when you say the state, what you mean is the taxpayers, because the taxpayers would actually be involved with the bank. They wouldn't have any voting rights. They couldn't draw out anything, but they could pay and pay and pay.
And there was a clean energy kind of a state bank also.
Right, that was one of the 4.
And it was for kind of risky venture capital type loans. And so, you know, there's a place for venture capital, but with the taxpayers' money?
Absolutely. Well, as we've seen nationally with the Solyndra debacle and other companies, you know, we can complain about the banks and financial institutions, but I would rather have them using their money than using taxpayer money. I mean, we just saw the thing with J.P. Morgan Chase. They lost $2 billion or more on risky investments. But none of the bank people or the customers lost any money. No taxpayers lost any money. The bank did, and a couple of their executives lost their jobs and all. That's fine. I wish we would put half the scrutiny that we have on J.P. Morgan, a private financial institution, on the government and on government projects, but we don't.
Yeah, we did a good job with keeping the unemployment insurance premiums at the lower level, and it could have gone sky high.
Yes.
So, kudos to the Chamber of Commerce for doing that. I was just talking to Monica Toguchi of Highway Inn, and she said, a few years ago she was paying $400 for unemployment insurance for all her employees. And this year she's been paying $15,000. So I suppose this bill would freeze it at $15,000 and it won't go any higher. But still, that's awfully high. And another feature of the bill would have paid workers, will pay workers 75% of average weekly wage if they go on off job and onto workers' comp. 75%, and they don't, they will probably not pay taxes on it. Why go back to work if you get 75% of average weekly wage? I thought that was a little high.
Well, and what a lot of people still don't understand about unemployment compensation, which is a tax, not an insurance, it's only on employers. No employee has ever paid a penny for unemployment compensation. It comes out of the employers directly. And as you pointed out, I mean, the increases have been just awesome and outrageous, particularly last year.
So hopefully the economy will improve and we'll be able to keep things in a saner level. But the fees have really gone up, and the fees went up with the airport tax, or we didn't reduce them.
That's
and
right.
that was to pay for the facility for
Car rentals.
rental cars companies.
Yeah.
So our poor tourists are going to get socked, and it's $750 a day, which is
in
tax.
addition to the other fees and taxes and all that. That's the surcharge.
And of course, about 30% of the people that rent cars are local.
That's correct. That's right.
So that's
Yep.
local, impacts local too.
Yeah, it's like all the time we say, oh, let's tax the tourists, or let's tax the military, or let's tax somebody else. Well, look in the mirror, because it's us that's being taxed.
Now, one of the streamlined tax, that's one of your favorite taxes to
8 years
talk
in a
about.
row.
You fought for 8 years. What happened with that tax this year?
Well, again, it died, fortunately, in the last couple of days of the session.
Maybe explain what that is.
The so-called streamline tax is a compact where states would join together and then pressure the federal government to pass a tax which basically would tax all your internet activities, your purchases and sales. And the internet, it's got its flaws, it's got its warts and all that, but for everything else, it is still the last bastion of free enterprise, of freedom of speech, and all of that. And people look at that, again, about the money. They see the money, and so they want to tax you. And there's more and more people, particularly in Hawaii now, that go to the internet for their sales. Now, some, in fairness, it's true that some businesses say, well, they should be taxed because we're taxed. We have to pay all these things like the unemployment comp and general excise tax and all that. It's a good argument, except that they have brick and mortar buildings. They're here in Hawaii. These basically are national companies that do business in 49, 50 states, and so it is different. But if you put that directly to a vote to the public, do you want your internet sales tax? They would say no.
It would cost them more.
Yeah, eight years in a row it's been up, and 8 years it's died.
So one of the big issues that comes up every year is gambling, legalizing gambling. And that came up again this year. It was more of an issue last year, but it didn't pass again, right?
Again, I think because of it being an election year, Hawaii and Utah being the only two states that don't have any form of legalized gambling. We have gambling probably going on right now. Some of your viewers are gambling, how long we're going to be on the program here. So we all know there is gambling, but not legalized gambling. And there were different proposals for a standalone site in Waikiki, slot machines, lottery, this, that, and everything else. And it'll be back again next year as well.
There's another business issue bill that bothered me, and that had to do with professional employer organizations.
Oh, the PEOs,
and
yes,
these are the
good point.
companies that do payrolls for small businesses. If a florist is too busy arranging flowers and delivering, then these type of companies will do the paperwork and pay all the taxes and
Right.
FICA for you. And
So you can do your business.
Well, you got to do things legally and make sure the numbers are right. Otherwise, you're in trouble with the federal or state government. But this bill would have regulated them and have them. It'd be regulated by the Department of Labor, and they would also investigate and enforce and fine you and.
And they'd have to have costly bonds, and basically it's a barrier to entry, and it's It's a specialized piece of legislation that the couple of big
Yes.
companies like, but there are dozens of little companies, and it really penalizes them. The bill is before it was passed. You and I voted against it, but it's on the governor's desk right now, and a number of us have urged the governor
The
to veto.
fees were sky high for
Yep.
registration, and I think a smaller company that would dealt with maybe companies with 100 employees would be paying $2,500 every 2 years to renew their license. If they had handled bigger companies, I think the fees were like, $10,000. I better check that. But
They were outrageous.
sky high.
And then you had to have a bond, but the kind of bond that's required is not provided by local insurers, so that meant you would have to deposit that money in the bank, and there the money would stay interest-free without your use of it and all that. So definitely it's a penalizing of small independent businesses.
Now, one of the other big issues is pensions, and you've fought pension tax last year. It didn't really come up this year.
Right.
But what is the situation with the pensions, and what in terms of the tax issue and so on?
The tax last year was really bad because people plan for years where they're going to retire and what the tax structure is. So, people are going to retire here, the military and a lot of people who have pensions, and they know they're not taxed here. Well, the governor last year wanted to come down and tax income all the way down to $37,500, and it just, what really frosted me is it was retroactive to the January before. And I just think that's so unfair when people have planned for a decade or two where they're going to retire and what the tax structure is. And if we put that tax, if we had enacted it, you'd see even more people moving to Nevada.
Representative Marumoto is being very modest because she was the champion last year. In fact, at a public hearing, she went up against the governor, and her points prevailed because she was right. She had done her homework, done her research, and she stayed with it. Because here are all these seniors on fixed incomes, that's number one, and number two, they've relied on their pensions. And we're talking about private pensions, the taxes. Now we can switch to the employees' retirement system, government pensions, which is an unfunded liability of from anywhere from $8 to $20 billion, the worst in the country. There are some changes that will kick in July 1st of this year that will affect new employees only, but not existing employees. So we have an unfunded liability there with government pensions and the government health plan, the EUTF.
Maybe you can give people an idea of how big is the state budget, the operating budget, the capital budget, and what does the money go toward?
$11 billion to start.
Just
Each
per year, right?
Per year. All sources of funding, right?
Yeah, and a good chunk of it is for capital improvement projects. And I can't fault them too much for that because when you do construction, you do stimulate job creation and help the construction industry as well as the real estate market and provide housing. And housing is so expensive, I think we need more of it.
Well, I won't fault them necessarily on the CIP or the capital projects, but I do on the operating part of the budget, because there we have increased the budget while every single mom, every family, every small business has been cutting back. Here is the government increasing expenditures, adding more people to the public payroll. Actually, they went above what the governor had requested. They gave the governor more than he wanted. So I voted against the budget for those reasons. $11 billion, that's an awful lot of money, and it's, again, even with bonds for construction, it's a debt that we've got to pay back, or our children or grandchildren.
And also, it's in terms of what the money is spent on. You have a certain chunk for education, and now you even have more for human services, right?
That's a good point, because all this time we've been talking about education. Everything we do is for the keiki. We love education, and it always took about 50% of the general fund portion of the budget. This year, human services surpassed education, and that's welfare, food stamps, MedQuest, subsidies to state hospitals, those things. It's now the single most costly item in the budget.
There's a lot of programs also that we now have to pay fees for or increase fees.
Right.
And what really bothers me is that the fees go to pay the salaries of the people who are in charge of the program, who performing the program. So, if they have a raise or there's not enough money, they're going to increase the fees. So like elevator inspectors, they added maybe 6 more inspectors, and the fees have gone very high. But on the other hand, we need the service. The construction industry was really asking for quicker service. And so it was really hard to stop this bill, and it did pass. But, the fees are just unbelievably high.
Even Representative Marumoto brought up education. And here are the kids complaining about tuition costs going up and all that, particularly at the University of Hawaii. Look at why the tuition costs are going up. We keep adding additional people to the university, my alma mater, and we add expensive positions like the chancellor. We have a new chancellor just approved now who's going to be even more expensive than the last chancellor. We add all of these positions and everything else. We're not improving the learning process. It's the administrative and the bureaucracy process. And who's going to pay for it? The kids are going to pay for it. The parents are going to pay for it in higher tuition costs.
So we don't have too much longer on the show, but I wanted to point out that you have a website. You run an organization called Smart Business Hawaii.
Correct.
And also Paychecks Hawaii is a division of that. Mm-hmm. And that is an organization that actually rates legislators on business friendliness.
Well, it's been since 1984. Lex Brody and I had developed it. And it rates all 76 legislators on business issues and whether or not they were active in trying to improve Hawaii's business climate. We don't look at social issues or things like that. And I'm happy to say that Representative Marumoto, rating goes from a 1 to a 5. The top rating is 1. Representative Marumoto has gotten more 1s, including this year, than any other legislator we've ever rated.
So people can find that on smartbusinesshawaii.com.
Correct.
Okay, and that's just about to be released, right?
That's right.
Okay, good. Because the elections are coming up, and that'll be interesting. And Representative Marumoto, what's next for you?
Oh, I have infinite possibilities.
You're going to do the television drama of your life, right? The reality show.
Oh, I guess so.
People would watch that. They tune in to watch that.
There's all these things that I haven't had time to do, but my husband, when I walked out the door yesterday, says, remember practicing to say no.
Yeah, that's a good policy. Well, thank you for joining us today. This has been a great show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
People can get more information on your website and also the blogs, the minority blogs at the legislature, right?
Thanks, Malia.
Aloha.
Thank you for joining us today. This has been News Behind the News. Aloha.